Let's reset for a moment, because it was Pennsylvania that took Biden over that proverbial line. Simon, are you still there? Okay, I think we've lost.
Sorry, yes, I am, Tembakili. I'm just seeing a statement from the Trump campaign that says they're going to continue pushing legally, prosecuting our case in court on Monday. But the events here of the last half an hour, to get everybody caught up, we got new results from Pennsylvania. They gave Joe Biden an advantage in Pennsylvania of over 30,000 votes. And that was the point at which, at around 11:30 here in the morning in Washington, D.C., the television networks, the Associated Press, everybody who's been crunching these numbers over the last 4 days concluded that Joe Biden's victory was now unassailable. He couldn't be caught up in those numbers by Donald Trump in Pennsylvania or in some of the other states where vote counting is continuing. So they all announced, made the declaration, projected the outcome of this race, that Joe Biden is now the president-elect of the United States. You can hear in the background here, and I'm sure it's being witnessed all over the country, particularly in Democrat strongholds like Washington, D.C., ongoing celebrations. Cars have been sounding their horns. People have been whooping in the streets now for the past 20 minutes here in Washington. And there really is, I think, now a sense in which we have turned a corner. Joe Biden on Twitter has said, "America, I'm honored that you have chosen me to lead our great country. The work ahead of us will be hard. But I promise you this, I will be a president for all Americans. Whether you voted for me or not, I will keep the faith that you have placed in me." So Joe Biden taking to Twitter to declare that he's won, to accept the mandate of Americans, that on January the 20th, 2021, he will be sworn in as America's next president. I'm sure he'll be appearing in front of the cameras before very much longer. And we wait to see what Donald Trump is going to do, because he will have learnt this news on the golf course just outside Washington, D.C. An hour ago, on his way to the golf course, he tweeted, "I won this election by a lot." A tweet that was immediately flagged by the social media platform as being untrustworthy and unreliable. Well, he didn't win this election, not by a lot at all. He didn't win it. Joe Biden won this election, and the celebrations that are taking place now across the United States at this news, I think really shows what a turning point this is. There are no options left now for Donald Trump. The campaign says they're going to pursue legal action in the courts on Monday. Forget it. This country's already moved on. This is over. Donald Trump becomes the first American president since 1992 to be thrown out of office after just one term. In the modern era, Lyndon Baines Johnson, after a term and a half, because of course he succeeded the assassinated John F. Kennedy, Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush, and Donald Trump are going to go down in history as presidents who only won at the polls once, and it's Joe Biden that's going to be moving into the White House next January.
And Simon, as we continue then to look at these various feeds of the celebrations in parts of the United States on news that Joe Biden is the new American president, before Election Day we had seen another unprecedented scene of stores and other property being boarded up, people fearing potential violence upon the confirmation of a victory or defeat for either side. So how likely is that at this stage, especially given the very bitter taste of the election run?
Well, I think you definitely have to be still concerned about the public reaction from this, because let's be clear, Donald Trump won 70 million votes. And while Democrats here on the streets of Washington are celebrating finally the victory that they always presumed they were going to be able to celebrate, this time last week they thought Joe Biden was going to win a landslide. He hasn't won a landslide. It's taken 5 days of vote counting and razor-thin margins in some states for Joe Biden to claw out this victory. So I think that there will be concern about what some supporters of President Trump will now do. Remember, It's not all that long ago, just a matter of 3 or 4 weeks ago, that the FBI arrested militiamen in Michigan who allegedly were plotting to kidnap the elected governor of Michigan, a Democrat, in a bid to spark a civil war. So as much as we're seeing live now demonstrations, celebrations on the streets of cities that are Democrat strongholds, in Republican strongholds there's going to be a deep sense of disappointment and in some places possibly a sense of anger fueled by the president's false insistence that the Democrats have rigged this election, which is why I think Joe Biden will feel that it is so important for Donald Trump now not just to back down and graciously concede, but to do what every losing presidential candidate up until Donald Trump has always done, which is to make the unifying speech to his supporters. Tell them this election was fair, we lost it fair and square, it's time for everybody to line up behind Joe Biden's leadership. Now, anyone who has watched Donald Trump over the last 4 years will know that that's not the kind of politician that he is, and he's never going to make that speech, I suspect. And that's what makes this situation in the US still pretty combustible.
And as you say that, Simon, you look at that tweet by Joe Biden in the last 14 minutes where he says, I will be a president for all Americans, but not all Americans, as you rightly point out, will accept him. You wonder then how he will begin to do that, perhaps without a concession of defeat or an admission of defeat from Trump or even an endorsement or well wishes.
It's a massive problem, Tempakili, and it's a massive problem not just for Joe Biden, who wants to be this kind of unifying presence. It's a massive problem for Donald Trump's fellow Republicans. Because if you're Senator Mitch McConnell now, who's the Republican leader in the Senate, and who hopes still to be the Republican majority leader in the Senate in January, because closely fought Senate races there have not given the Democrats yet the majority that they were hoping to witness, Mitch McConnell knows that in one sense he's now going to be freed from having to worry about the antics of Donald Trump in the White House, but in another sense he knows that Donald Trump won the votes of 70 million Americans, and unlike any of his Republican predecessors, is not simply going to slip silently away into the night. He's not going to shut down his Twitter account. He's going to continue weighing in hourly on the affairs of state here throughout Joe Biden's presidency. He may well buy a television network here to create a platform for himself and members of his family to continue advancing their political ambitions. And the Republicans look at these numbers and say, OK, 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. Even if a third of them, only a third of them, were true Donald Trump believers, and listen to the sounds of those celebrations that we're seeing on the streets now, even if a third of them were true Donald Trump believers, Donald Trump still will be a hugely vibrant presence within Republican politics. And what the Republicans are going to do about that is going to be partly the story of the next 4 years. How do they seek to manage that, knowing that at any point Donald Trump could say, I'm running for the presidency in 2024, Ivanka is running for the presidency in 2024, and if you don't go along with what we're doing, we'll run as independent third-party candidates and we'll take our 25 million core supporters with us. So it's a huge problem for the Republicans and also a huge problem for Joe Biden.
And just on the Republicans then, Simon, Donald Trump's rise to the top of the Republican ranks to become president in 2016 was by no means a traditional one. Part of his appeal to his base was that he was not an establishment candidate. You wonder what a post-Trump Republican Party will look like. Do they now turn to his soon-to-be former Vice President, Mike Pence?
Yeah, well, look, Donald Trump was not just a Republican establishment candidate. He wasn't really a Republican. And what Donald Trump succeeded in doing in the 2016 election and since then was mobilizing large numbers of people, particularly on the far right, whose politics had traditionally been kind of consigned to the darker fringes of the internet and who were brought center stage by Donald Trump. we saw on Tuesday night the election for the first time ever of a Republican openly supportive of QAnon and the conspiracy theories that it advances. She's going to be sitting in Congress as a Republican Party. So Donald Trump reshaped republicanism around his own ideology, which in many ways is not core conservative ideology. It's always been extraordinary here that Christian evangelicals would line up behind a Republican president who, in the closing days of the 2016 election, was making payoffs quietly to women who were accusing him of having had affairs with them during 2015 and 2016. Mike Pence would like still to be relevant in 2024. He is forever tied to Donald Trump. It will be difficult for him, I think, to establish a reputation as his own man within the Republican Party, but not impossible. I think there are huge questions about what happens now to a whole host of people that have willingly served and enabled Donald Trump in the presidency. You can think of people like Stephen Miller, like Kellyanne Conway, like Kayleigh McEnany, the president's press secretary. You know, these people are going to find it very difficult, I think, to find much of a welcome in the salons and debating chambers of Washington, D.C., because this city at least rejects the brand of politics that they have brought to the fore. But also, Tembakili, I just want to underscore, because I know we got a batch of new viewers at the top of the hour on ETV, we also need to emphasise that Joe Biden's running mate, Senator Kamala Harris, has made history here this afternoon. She is going to become America's first female vice president and the first person of colour to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. And if you were wondering who America's first female president might be, right now you would obviously be thinking very strongly about the possibility of Senator Kamala Harris at some point either succeeding Joe Biden in the presidency should anything untoward occur during his presidency, or running in her own right in 2024, 2028 as a substantial presence politically here in the United States. So all sorts of ceilings being shattered here as a result of this announcement.
Just on Harris then, Simon, one could say there's a bit of poetry, if you will, or irony in Kamala Harris now, the first woman of color or black woman to become the vice president in the United States, because at the beginning of Donald Trump's campaign, some would say he ran a racist campaign with those birther remarks about Donald Trump, and it cannot be lost that the administration that replaces him, boots him out of the White House, represents some of the very things that he ran against 4 years ago.
Yes, absolutely. And let me just make one point that occurs to me. When Donald Trump leaves that golf course and heads back into Washington, D.C., I'm just looking to see if we've had any updates from the press corps travelling with him. We have not. When he heads back into Washington, D.C., his motorcade is going to encounter these throngs of people celebrating his defeat. It's been notable on the campaign trail that every time he's referred to Senator Harris, he always draws out and elongates her name, Kamala, and then he pauses and he again goes, Kamala, as though there's something inherently foreign and odd about her name. And that has been something of a dog whistle for his supporters on the campaign trail. I mean, you know, what the country, by any measure, would traditionally be witnessing now is the moment of the coming together of the country to try and unite around the presidency of Joe Biden. And traditionally, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, would pick up the phone, he'd congratulate Joe Biden, he would invite Joe Biden and his wife Jill to come to the White House for a meeting to discuss the transition, because remember, we've got 70 days now before Donald Trump moves out of the White House and Joe Biden moves in, so there's a whole transition that now gets underway, and then that would lead us towards Inauguration Day, when tradition would suggest Donald Trump and Melania Trump welcome Joe and Jill Biden to the White House. They all get into cars together. They make their way up to Capitol Hill, and Donald Trump is there to observe the swearing in of Joe Biden. Now, I can't tell you that any of those norms and traditions are going to be observed over the next 70 days, because no norms and traditions have been observed by President Trump since election night. So to some extent, the ball is back in his court, although Tembakili, these scenes that we're seeing now on the streets of America, people celebrating wildly the news that Donald Trump has been defeated in this race for the presidency. And I think cheering there, USA. I see from the press pool travelling with Joe Biden in Delaware that his campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dillon, has described herself as ecstatic. She says it's a great day for this country. She says that she'd been on a run when the news came through, and her mother called her on a phone to tell her that CNN had called the race for Joe Biden. And it was that moment when CNN made the announcement, ABC, CBS, the Associated Press, that suddenly the genie flew out of the bottle. The pressure gauge was uncorked, and you saw these scenes on the streets begin to develop here.
Simon Marks, our man on the ground as we cover this breaking news out of the United States.